We are continuing our discussions about the future of the Cape Peninsula baboons, and today we've got Lorraine from Baboons of the South, and really want to discuss a bit more depth about the impact of the decision making, specifically with regards to protocols, Lorraine.
Yes, I think that everything with baboon management circles back to mitigation and ethic. So baboons are public assets, and they are part of our heritage, and we certainly want them to go back, be in our future. So I'd like to have a look at the guidelines. I think the public most probably don't know enough about the guidelines. They were set up by Cape Nature, and UCT was involved in their formulation. And basically, I'm going to talk about two aspects. One is the damage-causing animals, as they're referred to in terms of the guidelines, and the dispersing males, those that leave their home troop to try and find another troop to create their own families. So mitigation is the bottom line for these guidelines. And Cape Nature has in writing, I think in 2012, Ryno, there was a letter which said mitigation has to happen before you decide to kill any baboons. Mm. The guidelines themselves have three levels, if you like, three fences, excuse the pun, where there's a low risk, baboons come in and they might feed on the pavement from people's gardens, etc. The second level is they get into bins, they might walk into an unoccupied house, they might get to vegetable gardens. There's many actions that the authorities have to take to prevent that. It's stated directly in those protocols that you have to educate, you have to legislate, you have to ensure that, for example, vegetable patch are covered, etc., that your bin is secured. So it's, with the current level of no mitigation, it's very easy for a baboon to progress through 1 and 2 and finally reach the third risk level, where if they go up to a person and maybe take food, or they enter a home that's occupied, that the baboon will then be put forward for euthanasia or killing in terms of those guidelines. So the very keystone of the guidelines is mitigation, and it's singularly missing still.
So just a quick question to Ryno. Are the guidelines, as they're called, are they legal?
Jenny, it's a difficult question because I don't know how those guidelines were adopted. I'm unaware of any public participation process that took place, and obviously these guidelines impact on public assets. So surely there should have been some sort of public engagement with regards to adoption of these guidelines. And further than that, I am aware that the Baboon Liaison Group was on record at that stage, or just after these guidelines were adopted. Whether they voted on these guidelines or accepted the guidelines as they were adopted is unknown to me. However, I would think that the public would have a say in such guidelines because it is impacting on public assets.
But Lorraine, you were part of the liaison group at that time.
Yes, in the November 2019 changes to the guidelines, the BLG was the responding party, so to speak, on behalf of communities. I do remember that meeting. Many were not at that meeting when those protocols were presented. But I asked the question, and I was told that the BLG is the public. They are the ones who have accepted those protocols.
Yet trying to get hold of minutes or any sort of decision-making from the BLG was now impossible. So
It was well nigh impossible, and also to get details of how many baboons had been killed according to those protocols was also difficult. It took 6 months to get the authorities to actually include it in their monthly reports and in their annual reports.
So since the protocols were adopted or taken on, how many baboons do you think have been killed without the mitigation in place in terms of the protocols?
Well, if we still don't have a baboon-proof bin, which is one of the main reasons why baboons come into town, unsecured bins, vegetable patches, they're not covered. I can speak with authority on the Simonstown area, the business area. It's full of open bins. So as far as I'm concerned, the mitigation required has never been present. Where have they legislated?
How many baboons
well,
have they
there are
killed?
80 baboons is the number that we have, I think, since 2012. It's recorded in the reports.
80.
So 80. So you have, and they are the males are targeted, alpha males. But my question is this: if you target the frequency with which the animals do it, how do you know which animals are actually doing it? They have no distinguishing features.
But Lorraine, when they introduced the protocols, I was still involved at that stage, and one of the requirements was that the residents had to make an affidavit. Before they could establish a case history of the baboons, the resident had to make an affidavit of damage caused. What's happened with that?
That's quite correct. You had to have an affidavit, and then any decisions to kill a baboon would go to the Wildlife Advisory Committee, which was Cape Nature. Very deliberately, the people on that panel did not live in the area, so they could not be swayed in any way about baboons and their behaviour. And that was withdrawn with no notice. I think around about 2018, 2019, so no affidavits. So
that's fallen away.
How do you corroborate evidence, so to speak, of raiding animals?
Lorraine, just on that, let's refer to the BTTG3 guideline with regards to raiding males that builds up a rap sheet and ultimately gets killed based on that rap sheet. Now, I've got it here in front of me. And it states, consider euthanizing a baboon if BTT has no more resources available to prevent the baboon from raiding. In other words, they've used staff members to get the baboon out of town. There's no more resources available. Then it says, reach upper limit of deterrence to prevent raiding. In other words, they've used paintball guns, they've used bear bangers to prevent. But now I'm getting to the interesting two of these points that this decision is based on. Exhausted legal means to remove attractants driving raiding behavior. Now, what would these legal means be that it has been exhausted that is driving raiding behavior?
Well, you have city bylaws and you have animal keeping bylaws. And I think, if I recall, there's been one fine issued for poor waste management. Nothing since.
As I interpreted exhausted legal means to remove attractants, I would think it is enforcement of legislation, as you said,
exactly,
and then possibly a baboon-proof bin, strategic fence, all of those things would be legal means to remove attractants. But none of those have been implemented.
No, it's very evident if you have to walk down the street in Simonstown, for example.
And then the last point, which is very interesting for me, it says, if efforts to educate owners on the consequences of inadequate baboon proofing has failed. So if the member of the community is not complying, we're going to kill the baboon. That's what it provides for.
It basically, if you had to ask me to describe baboon management in 3 words, it would be blame the baboons. They have been persecuted endlessly with the policies that I believe that are in place. And the only education has been done by NGOs and volunteers.
But if we come back to
their own efforts.
The one thing that the city has done is the implementation of the ranger program, service provider. And if we look back since 2009, when they moved to a much more professional service provider and the monthly service provider reports, we can see in those service provider reports over the past 15, 16 years, every single month, it's the same problems, it's the same waste, people making all the waste issues, the Navy, for example, the light industrial park. So the service providers themselves start off by acknowledging this is a problem. They also go on to then say how successfully they've kept the baboons out of town. So my problem with the protocols, Lorraine, is the fact that on the one hand, the service providers are saying this is the reason the baboons are coming into town, but we're keeping them out of town 98 to 99% of the time, and yet the animals are still being killed without any humans being prosecuted.
I think that, first of all, the method of concluding how the percentage of baboons out of town was never feasible to me. It was 50 plus one member of the troop means you 50% plus one out of town. How do you manage that? I don't think that's feasible at all. But I think even worse for me is you have a ranger program struggling with no mitigation, with millions being spent on it. So the struggle to keep the baboons out was much greater than if they had mitigation inside the urban area. So you'd keep the baboons out. So, I mean, I think it speaks for itself. If you have mitigation plus your rangers keeping them out of town, why do you actually need guidelines? You need a set of guidelines for human behaviour in a World Heritage Site, as far as I'm concerned. If you live in a World Heritage Site, you follow a set of rules and you have a responsibility to act towards wildlife.
So, Ryno, what do you think would have happened if, for example, the SA Navy had been fined, or if the rentals at the light industrial park or the businesses had been fined?
Well, Jenny, there's the old saying of with parties that is not complying with legislation and there's no consequences, will just carry on with their non-compliance. And in the absence of enforcement, you cannot address the issue. And that's what's happening here. But there's a bigger concern for me, Jenny, and I actually wanted to ask you this. And like Lorraine said, around about 2012, there was an application that had to be lodged with the BCA, the Baboon Conservation Authorities, with regards to the euthanasia of baboons in terms of BTTG3 raiding baboons. Now, in that application, they submit this BTTG3 document, making provision that they've exhausted all legal means to remove attractants. Now, if no mitigation has been implemented, and if law enforcement are not being enforced, how were such applications approved for the euthanasia of that baboon? Did they misrepresent the facts to the BCA? Or is the situation that Cape Nature was aware that no mitigation was implemented, but still they authorized the killing of the baboons?
I think that they must have been aware of what was going on, because the people who sit around the table all receive the service provider reports. So whether they were called the BTT or now the JTT, every month they got the service provider reports over the past 15 years, wherein they identified the problem areas. So to go ahead and then agree to remove a problem animal, they were aware of all the facts. But what I find further frustrating is we pointed out to them, Lorraine, on so many occasions that it wasn't making a difference. However many baboons they'd killed by the end of 2016, 17, 18, the baboons were still coming into town. When Andrew King did his research in Dagama Park, he pointed out in his research document that the way that they were managing the baboons was causing the females to behave differently and go into town. So the authorities are aware of the facts. They're aware of the fact that they haven't mitigated the problems. The service providers are saying, listen, we can't do our jobs properly, but they carried on killing baboons.
And there's no scientific document, and I've asked for it on a number of occasions, which shows by removing a male who comes into town too often in their terms, saves the rest of the troop from coming to town. We've proven so many times that it's actually not so. So why continue to do it? You mentioned the human element in a previous discussion. They have to deal with the human issues. You cannot blame baboons for human irresponsibility.
Lorraine, what is interesting for me about that you're saying you must address the human element, is that the City of Cape Town entered into a lease agreement with a restaurant just on the other side of Simonstown. The terms and conditions of that lease agreement is exactly the terms and conditions as set out in our management plans to manage baboons, whereby they must provide for mitigation, electric fencing, they must secure their waste. It goes even as far as to state that the staff that works at this restaurant must do an orientation with regards to how to deal with the baboon if it comes on the premises. So they enforce that with regards to their lease agreements, but they're not enforcing that in the urban area with regards to their general ratepayer.
Well, has it been enforced though?
Well, I was just going to say, I know the restaurant that you mean, and I do know that the service provider went there and did a lot of education. They helped them build a a cage for their bins. The electric fence is only partial. It's a city facility. The ski boat club is a city facility. And the cages there are hopelessly inadequate after all these years. I mean, you know, after 15 years, I'm seeing more or less the same thing. And then everybody says, oh, the baboons tossed all the bins and it's all their fault. No, I don't think so. So it's quite a ludicrous situation.
And in their BSMP, I can't remember which point it was, but the sand parks in Table Mountain National Park was supposed to undertake an audit of all the areas and amenities where the baboons were coming, you know, there was a problem area, and the interface was problematic. And as far as we know, because when we did our court application, that was 2 years after they'd agreed that they needed to do this audit. Nothing had happened. So it's the same old, as you say. The ski boat is not new. It's been there for...
No, the ski boat.
And you know, Jenny, what is interesting for me is that if you and I apply for a permit to deal with damage-causing protected animals, before Cape Nature will reissue such a permit to us, we need to show mitigation. We need to even have to show the slips of the costs that we've incurred before Cape Nature will consider that application. Now, we are aware that there was various service providers over the last 25 years managing baboons. And we're also aware that part of the land that Sandparks is managing, City of Cape Town, is the landlord. Now, the question arises, what documents did the City of Cape Town or its service provider show to Cape Nature for this permit to hunt baboons, to get this permit reissued? What mitigation has been put in place? Because there are no mitigation in place. As we've discussed, there's no baboon-proof bins, there's no strategic fence, there's no law enforcement being enforced. And however, these permits just gets issued. And the oversight on these permits is also problematic, because no one is overseeing implementation of this permit. There's not a Cape Nature representative that stands there and see oversight of implementation of these permits. As a consequence, it's a situation where the decision vests in the service provider of the City of Cape Town and not in Cape Nature.
So do you remember the very famous situation where all the baboons permits were issued to give the vineyards permission to hunt baboons? And Ryno and I went to investigate the electric fences, which was their mitigation to stop the baboons coming into the vineyards. And we found that the electric fences were porous, they weren't turned on, the gates were open, but yet they were still given permits to kill, they said 7 baboons, yet on the report some as many as 30 baboons went missing. And so how did that happen? You know, how do you issue permits to hunt when the mitigation is not in place, you haven't checked that it's in place, and yet you still issue the permits? And it carries on, and of concern is that what happens in Cape Town is emulated over the rest of the country. So we've got small towns on the border of Kruger, for example, or Bladder River Canyon, saying, but in Cape Town they follow the protocols, which, Lorraine, you have said are only worthwhile if the mitigation is in place first.
You can't operate without mitigation because it's key. It's like trying to drive a car with no petrol. But I think what is repugnant to me is in June 22, Barbara Creasy, the then Minister of Forestry and Fisheries, said, get your act together, get Sandparks and the 3 authorities working together. But she also referred to quite obviously about you mustn't kill the alpha males or the determined males because of the impact it has on the social cohesion of the troop. But they've killed a lot of baboons, and then they talk about baboon behavior changing. But have they done any study as to the impact they have of removing baboons, using pain aversion to get them to move on? From my own personal views, I feel, just to talk about the paintball guns, you see changes in the troop and their behavior. They're chased from pillar to post. They're never given an opportunity to settle and to forage for a while and then move on, because it might rattle the cage of some of the residents who haven't secured their bins. So I've observed that a lot in different troops, and there's definitely a change in behaviour. They look over their shoulder, they're always on the run. And And I do believe if you stick to the operating procedures, it could have been done in a much different way. And paintballs, the rule is use it only when you really have to. So not only are we interfering with their daily life, we're also interfering with their familial connections. So something else which has shown its head, which I found rather disturbing, and I know Dr. Gaynor spoke on it, was mimicking predation. Yeah. So the sick and the injured and the old. So these are urban baboons. There's no getting away from it. So you have a very old girl in the Smith's troop. She's impaired. She's injured. What do they want to do? Remove her because she's old. There's another old girl in Simonstown. They're all part of the social fabric of those troops.
And the question is, would those old girls make any difference to the so-called raiding behaviour?
Absolutely
because
not.
While the attractants are there, the entire troop comes down. And the scientists are aware of this. They know that the whole troop, after 25 years, they know where the easy food rewards are. So taking away one of the older ones or taking away one of the injured ones, it's not going to change what the troop knowledge is. They know where the easy foods are. So I, like you, find this incredibly repugnant.
But just on the social fabric of the troop, I mean, they're integral parts of the troop. So, you know, they go to the sleep site tonight and there's a whole big different change the next day because a baboon has been taken away. And I do believe there is a difference between in the wild and in the urban space. Possibly, I'm making assumptions, ties are maybe tighter between baboons.
You know, Lorraine, we're getting back to the same old saying of if they stick to the letter of their documents,
yes,
we can't point fingers, because if you have a look at the guidelines and you have a look at the mitigation that must be in place, you have a look at how sick and diseased animals must be treated, you have a look at what the education that must be given to ratepayers or to the public. If they adhere to that, no one can point a finger. Yeah. And the harsh reality is they are not adhering to it. And that is why we've got a situation where baboons, older baboons, are being removed from troops, but their documents doesn't provide for that. That's not what their documents are saying. And in essence, if they just adhere to their documents and the letter of their documents, if that does not work, then they can look at other management options. And then they can go back to the public and say, these management options, we've done everything. We've implemented everything. We've done everything in terms of the documents public that you have sight of, that you've approved. And thereafter, come back to the public and say, these strategies doesn't work anymore. We now want to go with this strategy and put it to the public then. But they're not doing it. They're not even implementing what is currently on the table. And that is why we are where we are.
I think also with the guidelines, they're up for review. There had better be public participation, because I think it would have to be a whole different set of documents if you consider the lack of mitigation, and that it's not going to be placed on the table of the Baboon Advisory Group, the supposed community representatives, that it goes out for public participation, because the public need to know what's going on.
As you said in the beginning, it's public assets. And what everyone forgets is the person that stays in Paarl and takes a trip on a Sunday through Simonstown to go and have a picnic and obviously see the baboons, it's also their assets. It's not only a selected few in the Deep South who may make a decision with regards to these natural assets. So for instance, if it's a decision with regards to removal of troops or new protocols or guidelines, it needs to go to the wider public, because those assets belongs to everyone in South Africa, all citizens of South Africa, and they must be managed and protected for all citizens of South Africa, not just a selective few that is complaining. Notwithstanding the fact that you need to listen to their complaints and address their complaints. But any such decision must be opened up to the wider public.
But that comes down to, if they were doing all the things that they should be doing, then the general public would be able to see the baboons where they are, and we wouldn't be at each other's throat. The one issue, though, Lorraine, I do really want us to chat about are the dispersing males. Yes. because they are not given any consideration at all. And I think with what we've heard from the draft action plan, there's going to be even less room for the males. And if one looks at the impact of the dispersing males on the general public, the public love these boys. They really love seeing these male baboons. And, you know, social media blows up when you see the baboons going into different areas. So what are your thoughts about what protection do these boys have, the dispersing boys?
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer, and I think that it needs a review. It needs a scientific review as to what can actually happen to these animals. What happens now is you have Earl, who caused a great big fuss in the suburbs. Everybody loved Earl. It reached Cape Flat stories, and everybody said, "Go boy." Yeah. He didn't survive. Then the animal who went to Sea Point, there was one seen in Constantia. You know, the lack of communication about these animals, you have to have empathy for their plight. So, very difficult question to answer, and I do believe that a special panel should be set aside, including public stakeholders from the public, to discuss how can we manage and deal with the dispersing males, because there's so much fragmentation of ranges at the moment because of development. And, you know, at ground level, a lot of the developments, there are no EIAs and no focus on securing waste, no good environmental policy. At the same time, spatial planning has been made a hell of a lot easier. You can have so many dwellings on a property. Where the infrastructure is going to come from and the resources, I don't know. So it's becoming more and more difficult. So I think a panel to look at that.
And because I think that, for me, the dispersing males, the minute they start their dispersal and start looking for a new troop to join, they're immediately falling foul of the guidelines.
Yes.
Because they are going into urban areas. And, you know, one of the criteria in the guidelines that really annoys me is this notion of baboons entering a property. They may not know you're sitting working in your study. They may see an open door and a bowl of fruit and decide, well, that looks encouraging, let's go for it. They may be completely unaware of the fact that your child is watching television, yet they are criminalized for that behavior. You know, the terms breaking and entering and entering entering a property, whatever, I can't remember the exact terminology now, but they are criminalized. So the minute the males start to disperse, which is an entirely normal process, they've started their case history. Again, the terms are just so criminalizing, a case history. For what?
You see, Jenny, we're sitting with the problem that Cape Town has so been overdeveloped that obviously you've cut the baboons off from natural dispersing areas, and you're going to see dispersing males in the urban area. The problem is, how do you address that dispersing male? Now, all of us got our views on that, and I'm not an expert. And you can only manage a baboon so far. My view on it is that such a male should be relocated to another troop and see if he integrates. And hopefully he will integrate. And if he does not integrate, then you need to look at alternative management options, for instance, translocating or whatever the case may be. But that's my view on it, because I would think that is the realistic thing to do. Because you've caused the problem. You've caused the baboon to be unable to naturally disperse by overdeveloping. And not having mitigation in place. We're getting back to mitigation. Alderman Nieuwoud said in 2009, I mean, how long ago is that? In 2009, she said there needs to be specific title deed restrictions in respect of property development in the urban area to mitigate baboons entering the urban area. It's never happened.
But Lorraine, I want to come back to what you said about Minister Creasy, where she said that they should not take out the alpha males. And you and I both know, because you do a heck of a lot of field work, that they are taking out the alpha males. And in effect, you know, back when I started working with the baboons, and however many hundreds of years ago that was, you always had a very strict code of discipline. So the breakdown of the troop structure that you were mentioning, I think it's really, really important, because in effect, what the authorities are doing by continually removing the dominant males, the alpha males, is they are leaving the teenagers, these very young baboons, in charge of the family. I mean, I saw the Slankorp troop the other day. The 3 young boys left in the troop probably have not yet reached their full adulthood, but all of the older males have been taken out. And so the authorities can't expect to conduct these operations. They're not following their own guidelines. We've established that. They're not taking cognizance of what the researchers like Andrew King are saying, the impact on the troops. And then they say that the animals are behaving badly, but they haven't done anything about it. And it's appalling, really.
Yeah, I think that very little understanding is given these troops when they remove a baboon. Yeah. It's a huge loss. So does anyone go out and monitor? I mean, you have senior management. They have a role to play, and their role is welfare of that troop. So somebody should be out there watching the dynamic of the troop, where there are multiple males, who's the leader, there's fighting, etc. But in my 15 years, they don't know their troops very well. They don't know the individuals, they don't know the characters. There needs to be so much more of that knowledge of your troop, so that if it does come to they want to remove a baboon, kill a baboon, there has to be huge objection to it if it's going to throw the troop into disarray, and have a good look at your mitigation to prevent it happening. That interest is not there.
No.
It should be there.
But when we were objecting, and you remember this, when we were objecting to the killing of the males, what was their response? Their response was, and you used it in your court papers, their response, and it was minuted, speed up the process. Because the activists are making too much fuss. So it wasn't, let's deal with it, let's put mitigation in place, we're back to mitigation. They didn't deal with it, they sped up the process so that they could get rid of the problematic males more quickly.
Yeah, the BTT minutes provide for that all males will end up on the rate sheets, and we need to speed up euthanasia of males, and also collar males. That's what the BTT minutes provides for.
So they acknowledged it. But they didn't do what you or I would have done, or what Lorraine would have done, is actually let's address the situation, let's get the mitigation in place. They still failed miserably in that department, but they made it quicker and easier for the authorities for the service providers to submit their case histories, have it rubber stamped, get rid of the boys as quickly as you can. And not just the boys, some of the juveniles and females
I think
as well.
the guidelines, I was quite shocked, allows for females to be killed, and if they have a juvie, the juvie is also removed. I think one of the biggest mistakes, if I look back in time, is that the authorities never ever saw activists or advocates, whatever you wish to call people who care and volunteer for baboons, as a stakeholder group in their own right. Yeah. If they had had a stakeholder group around the table and allowed decision-making to happen along those lines together with stakeholders, I think we would have been better off now. I think it would have taken a lot of the acrimony out of baboon management and activists versus the authorities, which is has always been there. It's silly, really. If they'd had a dialogue and stakeholder groups, I think it would have helped a lot. Look, I think that some males would still have been removed, but I think there would have been some ethic about it. Look, killing is not mitigation and it's not ethical, but I'm just saying if it comes to it, every single avenue must be followed before you kill a baboon. Yeah. And I know Dr. Gaynor said that as well. Everything must be done.
Well, their own papers said.
That's
what Ryno read out earlier. Their own papers say.
There's one of the minutes of the Baboon technical team provides for a statement that says that Cape Nature will not authorize the euthanasia of baboon in an area where the public has not sufficiently baboon-proof. So they knew, the Baboon technical team knew, without mitigation, Cape Nature will not authorize the euthanasia of a baboon because it's in their minutes, and they confirm it. However, we're now in 2025, and still there's no mitigation in place, and still baboons are getting killed. So where's the problem? Who created this problem, and why is this problem persisting? And those are the two hard questions that needs to be asked.
Do you want to carry on?
I just, just to go back to dispersing males, I think that the rate of success has been very low. And the two males who made it from the north to the south, they got into the Gama troop, were electrocuted. And one of the very good leaders in the Gama was electrocuted. So we still have these issues of power lines. Baboons are losing their life to power lines, and we can't underestimate the impact that has on the rangers who have to actually deal with that. And I also think, talking of stakeholder groups, I also believe the ranger role is a very important one. I don't think it's given enough time or education or training, and I think they should also be a stakeholder group.
Yeah.
They are the most important interface on the ground, as far as I'm concerned, and they paid very little mind as to what they do.
Lorraine, you referenced power lines. After 25 years, we're still greasing poles and we still use rubber snakes. That is how far we've come with baboon management. We actually greasing poles to stop baboons from climbing up a pole. They can't insulate the electrical infrastructure like they've undertaken to do since 2005, actually.
Yeah.
And we're still sitting with people greasing poles and putting rubber snakes on poles to keep baboons off a power line. It's astounding.
I would like to just circle back to what you were touching on, Lorraine, about the importance of a good leader. If one looks at one of the icon baboons of all time, would have been Eric of Komiki, who reached a very grand old age in his 20s. And under his leadership, the troop was very stable. We saw a lovely multi-male troop. Baboons came and go. William joined the troop, Jesse, etc. When they started eliminating the dominant males and females as well, because you're absolutely, correct, they were taking out female baboons and juvenile baboons, you started to see less troop cohesion and things that we would never have seen before would small groups of baboons going off on their own to get easy food rewards in the villages. And I come back to Andrew King's research paper. He identified this. The way you are managing is causing the lower ranking animals the opportunity to go and get easy rewards on their own. That never happened. Whether we people think that we can manage the baboons with our rangers and our paintball guns, the troops manage themselves with good leaders. You take away the good leaders and you've got a lack of troop cohesion. And they know this, but they're carrying on anyway.
Jenni, you've got first-hand information with regards to the Slunkop troop and the water shortage on top of that mountain.
Yeah.
And the water tank that was placed there, who placed the water tank there for water for the baboons?
Well, it was originally Dr. Dave Gaynor, Ruth Kansky, Dr. Kansky, and Wally Peterson identified that Slunkop is very, very dry in summer. So they put up a couple of tanks. The first tank they realized was too close to the village. So working cohesively with what was then the Baboon Management team or the Baboon Liaison Group, I can't remember which one it was, they decided to put up a water tank above Ocean View, and it did work. It was very successful. But then in the fires of 2008, it got burnt down. And for some bizarre reason, Table Mountain National Park wouldn't let us replace it.
And
so in summer particularly, the baboons look for water, and the most easy source of water is in the urban areas.
So they pushed them in the urban area because there was no water available.
Yeah.
And that is the type of management that we're talking about in the last 25 years. There's no water available on the mountain, so we are not going to provide for water. The baboons can rather go into town, in essence.
In essence, that's basically what's happening.
Good. Can I just throw in another thought about collars? I know there's been huge objection to collars because they're so huge, uncomfortable. Females, the Wendy case with that awful collar she has on, and if she's just had a baby. If there were decent-sized collars which fell off of their own accord when they'd served their time, which would conserve the safety of the baboons and help the rangers do their job a whole lot better, do you think it's a feasible option?
Well, there are, and that's, I think, why, speaking for myself,
Yeah.
that's why I'm so annoyed with the collars that they utilize, because they work on a weight ratio per the mass of the animal. But they forget the bulk. So I'm just going to use this. It would be the equivalent of me having this stuck around my neck day in and day out. And they don't want to go back and take the collars off. So as you say, there are drop-off collars. There's drop-off collars, there's slim collars, there's all sorts of really good technical know-how. So the frustration to me is that if this information is so valuable to you, why aren't you using good technology? It makes sense. It's there. And it's not necessarily, in many cases, it's not that much more expensive than the old, bulky, horrible collars that they've got. So again, why are they making the decisions that they make? Everything seems to point to the fact that they're not really interested in the baboons and they don't really want them. Your phrase, Lorraine.
Yeah, they've considered an unwelcome burden because he seems to be resistant to obvious solutions. And if you think of the amount of money that has been spent on the Baboon Ranger program, if somebody had sat down and said, well, if we divert some of this funding and we could put a fence up here and we could look at better technology, you have these trunk radios and collars, you could have done better, but it is an unwelcome burden. Nobody wanted to sit down and find solutions. They said, no, we've given you a group of rangers into the mountains, please. That's how it was for me.
Lorraine,
that's my opinion.
I've always been of the view that the whole intention of the initial researchers in 2000 was that as the mitigating strategies takes effect,
yes,
you will be in a position to reduce your ranges. That is how I saw it, based on the implementation strategy of that plan at that stage that was drafted by Gaynor and Kansky. However, with regards to collars, what is interesting for me, once a collar has reached the end of life and once it's no longer transmitting, surely your first priority must be to remove that collar. Why must that animal be burdened with that collar for years on end when that collar doesn't serve a purpose? It's nothing short of animal cruelty. That's how I said. I see collars as animal cruelty in any event. But Wendy is a clear example, and it caused all of the public to stand together and scream and shout from the hills, please remove this collar. And still there was no action. And a private entity had to come and remove that collar. Now that shows the interest that Cape Nature and Sandparks and the City of Cape Town has in baboons. By not even taking the request to remove a collar that's become obsolete. That is the view that they've got of baboons. And it's shocking.
I just want to circle back to something that you said, which was, why didn't anybody say, let's use our resources differently? Well, credit where credit is due is UCT's Professor Ian actually did when I can't remember which year it was, but he started really pushing hard for the fences. And he said if you implemented strategic fences at various points, we would need less money. So he backed up what Kansky and Gaynor had already said in 2000. The thing that I find interesting is that since then, we've got all these tools in the toolbox. The fences, and we've got the professors arguing for the fences, but yet we're not using all the tools in the toolbox. So when we started the Zoom meetings with Alderman Eddie Andrews, he again referred to the fences. He again referred to all the tools in the toolbox. But the only tool they take out of the toolbox is the paintball gun and the rangers. So I don't understand again why they are spending so much money in one direction when everybody has shown them if they did things a little bit differently, they would actually be achieving better success and probably saving money in the long run. I don't understand that.
I think UCT definitely put forward recommendations on the fences. They highlighted waste as a big issue. But, you can take a horse to water. If people don't want to redirect their budget, there are all sorts of reasons given that you can't, it's a finite budget. It's specifically for this purpose. There was no latitude to move money around. But yes, they did. They certainly did. But it didn't come from the authorities, and they didn't take the advice either. And they're still not taking.
No.
the advice given about baboon-proof bins, etc.
Yeah, in fact, they've seemed to have backtracked on the baboon-proof bins. The researchers at UCT seem to have backtracked a bit.
It seems to have fallen to the bottom of the list. Fences, but, in Simonstown, they're point-blank refusing to put up a fence, which was put forward, I think both Professor Orion and Dr. Gaynor drew a line for a fence. They put the proposal in, and it's been turned down. And then for all the reasons, welfare and damage to property, the baboons, they need to be removed.
Yeah.
The bottom line of it all is just the legacy of an open access park. And Table Mountain National Park is an open access park where animals can come and go as they please. And at the end of the day, while there's attractants in the urban area, animals will leave this open access park to go to those attractants. And until such time that the necessary strategic fences are in place to keep the animals in the national park, they will always be in the urban area. And the only way to address it in the urban area is to limit waste, baboon proofing, enforcing legislation. And then there will not be attractants in the urban area for those animals to leave the park to go to.
Mm. But the thing that I just find interesting is that when the academics were arguing for the fences, there was plenty of space for the baboons to forage and be free roaming and live out their best lives. But now that we don't have fences, suddenly we're talking about an overpopulation and too many baboons to manage. And is it that there's too many baboons to manage because we are only reliant on rangers? But I don't see how we can argue carrying capacity has been reached when just a couple of years ago you were talking about if there were fences, the baboons would have all of the space and there would be plenty of room for them to live out their best life. So it does seem a little bit of a change.
It's a contradiction. It's a contradiction. And I think that the experts is in a situation where they need to tailor their narrative to meet the needs.
Yeah.
And those needs are the removal of the baboons. So they need to tailor their narrative to support that.
So today's conversation was about the protocols. Lorraine, what would you like to see happening next with the protocols?
Well, I would like an alternative to protocols and guidelines. I would like to see a human set of responsibilities if you live in a specific area, because we are blaming the baboons for lurking and walking indoors, which is quite ridiculous. So if humans take responsibility, the problems we have would dissipate to a large degree. But it has gone on a long time. Baboons have become habituated, they've become used to human food, and that is a difficult hurdle to jump. And I believe that fences will help in that regard. One hopes that you can rewild them, in quotes, behind a fence where they learn to be baboons again. Because now they are baboons that come to the urban area for human food. And I really see it as quite a tragedy, what has happened.
Jenny, just on what Lorraine has just been saying now about rewilding, what is your view on provisioning far away from the urban area?
You know, if I were the authorities right now, I mean, we've been suggesting provisioning for many, many years. I would see it as a way of breaking the habit of baboons going into urban areas to get the easy food rewards. You know, people say if they provision, they're going to have more children, the fecundity rate will increase, etc., etc., etc. But they're getting the food anyway, Ryno. You know, they can go down and walk out with handfuls of food at any time. So I really believe that it would be a very, very worthwhile experiment to take food and put it back up on the mountain so the baboons break the habit of coming into the urban area every day and stay safe on the mountains. Give them the authorities the opportunity to get waste management in place, train the rangers to a really, really high level, and for the baboons, break the habit of coming down into dangerous. That's the big thing for me. It's the danger of the urban areas. Get them back to natural foraging again up in the mountain. I would try it. I've been suggesting it for years.
What is also very interesting for me is that the Welcome Glen 4 or 3, all of a sudden is back with the Dagama troop now.
Yeah.
and all of a sudden the waterfall troop is being kept out of the urban area. Why is this now the case? Why hasn't it been the case 2 or 3 years ago when all this complaint started?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I think there's very many levels to the question. I've always felt that the biggest single expense of the urban project is the men in the field, and they need to be trained to a very high level. You know, they're called rangers, but rangers are a very, very honoured career in Africa, and these guys do not have ranger training. I also think that the senior managers need to be in the field a heck of a lot more. The guys need they need help. It's a difficult job. You know, you get angry residents. You're seeing the animals you look after get torn apart by dogs, killed in the pileup. It's a very, very difficult job. And I don't think that there's nearly enough support or training. Why they're suddenly being successful now, there's all sorts of things that come into play. It could be seasonal changes. It could be that the team is working to get together more cohesively. They're trying different tactics. The ghillie suits, I think, in Waterfall.
Yeah. But they're not more recently they are close to the urban edge, either at Waterfall or at Happy Valley or at Greenpoint, and some are still coming into town, and Juvies on their own.
On Juvies on their own?
Yeah, 2. I saw 2 the other day. So that for me is a tragedy. That one was about a year and one was 18 months, not more than that.
Wow.
Very young. And the men struggle. It's an incredibly difficult job in a very difficult area. Not everybody is sensitive to what the rangers do, and that makes it very, very awkward. But it varies, Ryno. They're up for a while and then they come down again.
I think
on the weather.
Yeah, I think for me the concluding point is that what you said earlier, Ryno, is that if the authorities did all the things that they have identified through their management plans, through the backup of the research, if they were doing all of those things, the whole project would be a lot more successful, Lorraine. That's what you were saying earlier. You know, if everything was in place, the baboons wouldn't be in the urban areas. People wouldn't be frustrated. They wouldn't be shooting these animals. They wouldn't. You know, it would just be so much better. And then, I think then they would have a hope.
And most importantly, then we will not be having this conversation today.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, for marathons, they're going through Simonstown Main Road. The troop is kept out on those occasions, so an extra effort is put in. Why not just put in an extra effort every day for these animals who are so persecuted? That's my belief about them, really.
Final thoughts. Do you think, how would you see the peninsula without baboons?
It's unacceptable. It's inconceivable. Cape Town is baboon world, and specifically peninsula baboons. They are a closed group or closed troops of baboons that's been living here for thousands of years. And if you take into account all we've already lost that used to roam Table Mountain National Park, do we now want to lose the baboons as well? It's unconscionable.
And for yourself, Lorraine, I mean, I know you've put in hours and hours and hours and hours.
They have a history on the peninsula. It's their place. Why should they be removed? They, as Ryno says, they've been here for thousands of years. They're a delight to so many. We did a couple of interviews with people visiting the caravan park, and we spoke about the potential for removal, and they all said, no, this is their home. Those are the words that we used. So it's not only for those people who have their homes on the urban edge in a World Heritage Site to say, we want these baboons gone because I want to leave my windows and doors open. My response is, if you learn to manage your property, you wouldn't have to worry about that any longer.
I think
it's a difficult one.
I think a lot of residents are making a lot of effort, but until the authorities fulfill their obligations, it's going to be difficult. I mean, where I lived in Komaki, I made sure I did everything correctly, but if my neighbours didn't, and there's no accountability, no fining or prosecution, I come back to the light industrial park. It's an absolute disaster for me that they have never been fined. But I really do believe that if the authorities are listening, they do realize that this whole management can be saved and the baboons can face a better future on the peninsula, and the communities can face a better future without baboons coming into homes every day. But the question is, are they listening?
That's the concern. Are they listening? Because they haven't in the last 25 years.
And 4 troops are facing removal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.